She will not force parents to age, which is the summary.
Right, well, we've decided I'm beginning. So my background is in theater as a theater practitioner, kind of generally on the performance side, as primarily now a dramaturg, actor, and director. So my PhD thesis is a new critical edition of this somewhat obscure Admiral's Men comedy, Look About You. And the idea is that in addition to ticking all the boxes that give me a PhD, I'm coming at it from a sort of performance-friendly background. So the idea is for me to think about what is practicable about the information that is otherwise historical that would go in annotations and introductions, etc. Now this connects to dramaturgy for me, I think professionally, because dramaturgs often get stuck with doing things that are useful for the theater company but not necessarily personally engaging. I mean, like writing program notes, which I don't know how many people read, and doing like mailings, etc. So there are some questions there about how we engage with the public in terms of marrying the sort of academic side through the practical side of theater specifically, which is kind of just my area. When it comes to the written public engagement or the written sort of communication, I have some questions about passivity and reception, because there's a sort of sense of putting the information out there counts as public engagement from theaters. Like, well, we're teaching them things, but the way we're teaching people often requires them to do all of the learning. They have to be active learners from the very beginning. So anyway, I'm just kind of putting that out there as a sort of thing to talk about, because what I'm slightly more interested in, or was before I got here today, is the idea of public engagement as programming. So the sort of simple definition of theater or performance is that you need one performer and one audience member. Kind of frequently in the arts, I think that audience member may be another performer or another artist and is not actually reaching outside of a comfort zone, or two people who maybe are just interested and don't know they're interested yet. So when people do programming, when they're looking at programming, there can be a sort of disconnect between the idea of creating art and the idea of creating something that's commercial. But I don't, first of all, see a problem with something commercial, because hopefully I would like to make money someday, as I think most people would. But I think maybe another way of looking at that is thinking about what's communal. So things that are commercial successfully mean they have found a wide audience. They found a large group of people that are willing to give their time or other resources, their money or whatever, to absorb that product, to buy that product, to engage with that product. And I think that in theatrical terms, it is the most simple thing of finding your audience, which is what people always talk about. So when people put on plays, they kind of ask some simple questions. Why this play? I mean, sometimes the answer is because we need something that will bring in an audience, and Macbeth will bring in an audience. But there are more questions. Why this play now? Why this play for this audience? Why this play instead of that play? So when you're looking at themes of work or types of work, you have to wonder, like, if there are some things you're uncomfortable with in Othello, but you're really interested in the themes of jealousy, why not do another play about jealousy? I call that, well, I tend to think of that as a sort of apology for the anachronistic awkwardness that comes from early modern drama or from another culture, from another time period. So, sorry, that kind of ended there. Programming, that's one way of engaging the public. Now, this is something that I actually don't know. This may be something that happens more in the States than it does here. But there's also a question of what makes a classic, and that has a lot to do with public engagement. There's sometimes a sense that if you present something that is important, because for years people have said it's important, then like that should be good enough for your audience. At one major regional theater in the US, when I asked the question, what makes something a classic, the answer was basically the author is dead. And now, thinking about all the people I know who are no longer with us and wrote things, I'm not sure that that qualifies to me as something worth presenting to the public. But I think that that's a really interesting question as well, is the sort of idea of how we're labeling things and what we think the reception of that label is. Yeah. So trying to connect the sort of practical questions of presenting things to the public with the academic research that I do is sometimes difficult, but I think really exciting when we can all remember that the world of academia is chock full of ideas that are new and close readings that bring new things from text to light, and that at the same time the practice-based world is brimming with questions that academics can answer, and with creative solutions to questions that academics have already posed. And the thing that I guess maybe I'm also interested in is finding ways for them to talk that is an active and engaged mode of communication. Some theaters are doing things where they're allowing the audiences to kind of become archivists, or the actors to become archivists. So instead of requiring, say, us to always be looking for archival material to put online to say, here's everything that's ever been done with Hamlet, opening up that sort of two-way street to say, have you done something with Hamlet? Why not put it out here? Then we can all talk about it at the same time. Anyway, that's not a really great note to end on, but I'm going to end it there because I'm really actually more interested in sort of conversation and the questions about theater, which maybe not anyone here has, but good. That was a good downhill note. So Jose can
all right.
really shine.
I think that what you were saying about the classics and what makes a classic is a really interesting question. Thinking about Shakespeare, which is the main central topic of this session, because part of our work. I mean, I'm doing another critical edition of a Renaissance play that is not by Shakespeare. And one of the things that we've been doing, I mean, Cassie in her way, and editors of these plays, is to get that repertoire of plays out there. It's not just about Shakespeare. There were other, wonderful dramatists in the period that don't get programmed in theatres. And why not? Well, they've not been done. There isn't a critical edition or an edition of the play that is useful for putting on a production, for instance, and that's something that we do with our work. So my background is completely different. I did my undergraduate in Madrid, in my native city, and then came over to do an MA in Shakespeare and Theatre at the Institute, where I carried on into a PhD, and my thesis would be an edition of Love's Cure or The Martial Maid, a play by John Fletcher and Philip Massenger in collaboration, probably around about 1615, so still in Shakespeare's lifetime, well, just about. And actually, performance is something that I've been using a lot in my work as well. As part of the thesis, we staged the play last year, which was tremendously exciting to see that play after so many years in a full production, original practices, Renaissance dress, wonderful music, an all-male cast. Which was quite a challenge to find 21 men to perform that play in Stratford-upon-Avon. So that was a way, actually. We had to pitch that to the University of Birmingham to get some funding to do this, because it's not cheap to put on a production of a play. And we had to devise a way of opening up the research to the wider community and the general public. So we ended up opening a blog, tweeting about it, and actually inviting the general public, the community, first in Stratford, and then we took the show up to Birmingham, to the main campus of the university. And we did it there for about 5 people, because what we lacked was publicity. So we didn't get it out there as efficiently as we should have, which is something that had a sort of negative impact on the performance. But it was great, I mean, to do it there. And related to this, I'd like to talk to you about 2 things that I've been doing lately. I've been the assistant to the editor of Blogging Shakespeare, which is a website that you might know. I actually could show you on the screen. It's been online for a couple of years now. No, I don't want to restart now. This is it. So it's targeted to the general public, basically. It's absolutely open access. You get blog posts, there you are, featured posts, recent posts, by all sorts of people. We have contributors who are academics in higher education. We've got, that's a logo of the Shakespeare Institute, actually. It's a blog post by Erin Sullivan, I think. Let's go back. We've got school teachers, secondary teachers. We've got actors and directors and dramaturgs collaborating on this. So they basically send us a post about something related to Shakespeare that they are interested in, and we publish it. And it generates a debate. I mean, there's a whole comments thread at the bottom of the page, and that helps sort of bringing that material in real time to a wider audience. And related to this, this blog, by the way, is maintained by the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust and edited by Paul Edmondson there, who's the head of research. And it's one of several blogs, you've got them here, Finding Shakespeare, Living Shakespeare, Remembering Shakespeare, and another one that is coming up, it's not still there, because it hasn't gone live, which is Reviewing Shakespeare, which says launching summer 2013, so it's imminent, but not quite. And again, it will be edited by Paul Edmondson in collaboration with Paul Prescott at the University of Warwick and Erin Sullivan at the Shakespeare Institute. And this will be a tremendous tool once it gets online, because it will contain a huge database of academic reviews of Shakespeare productions and productions of Renaissance drama. I think we have all learned a lot from Pete Cowan and his Bardathon, because he's probably one of the most efficient and the quickest reviewers that I've ever met. He watches our show and gets the review online in just a few hours. Because the thing with academic reviewing, when one goes to see a play and you have to write a review for Shakespeare or Shakespeare Bulletin or Shakespeare Survey of one of the academic journals, is that you take a few notes, you go home, then you forget about it for a few months because the deadline is maybe next year, and then in a few months' time you get back to it, you can't remember anything, you just have a few scratchy notes that you scribbled while you were in the theatre and you couldn't see very well the piece of paper, and maybe you actually wrote something on top of another line and you cannot read anything in your notes, but then you produce a review, hopefully an insightful one. And then it gets published maybe in a few months' time or maybe next year, which means that review of that show, the review is delayed in time. So, for instance, I just handed in a review of the Globe productions of Twelfth Night and Richard III that happened last year in September. I saw both shows in September. So I've handed them in now to Gaillard Le Sabatin, the French journal, and then they might not get published until maybe the spring of 2014. So they don't generate any debate, they don't engage with anyone, and it's in a closed publication. So what Reviewing Shakespeare will do is that it will be open access, and everyone will be able to see that review in real time. So instead of lazy me waiting for a few months to write my review, I will write it straight away after seeing the show. It will get published, pre-published in Reviewing Shakespeare, and then eventually in the journal, which will open it up to the general public. We are opening the website actually with full access to all reviews in, I think, Gaillard Le Sabatin for the time being, Shakespeare, and maybe Shakespeare Bulletin, where we're still trying that, but it looks very likely. So. This will be a fantastic tool. It will all be online, and again, it will all be online. Who will use it? Well, I don't know, and that's probably the question. So I'll end it there. Pete?
Okay, thank you. I was thinking this morning, and I'm sure this has come up a lot, about how much I hate the word impact. That incredibly kind of. I mean, I know we've talked about the difference between kind of knowledge transfer and knowledge exchange, because it always comes back to the impact agenda of higher education, that's sort of very masculinist kind of smashing into something. And when I was writing an impact case study for the University of Nottingham, where I currently work, we were under a lot of pressure to find the evidence of how our impact had changed people, which gives me great ideas of sort of, trying to see the bruises on the faces of the people that our work has impacted. And I find the whole model very, very strange, because my academic career has not really found a distinction between my research and my public engagement. My research has always come out of my public engagement, has been driven by my public engagement, and almost no, apart from some really obscure notes on 1670s miscellanies of early printed drama, there's very little of my work which hasn't in some way had a public engagement aspect to it. My blog, which Jose very kindly mentioned, that started during my MA research, where I was trying to review the Complete Works Festival in Stratford, and it was precisely that idea going on, that there was this great festival happening, and none of the academics were writing about it until what was going to be a couple of years later. So I thought, well, I'm only a master's student, but I will at least start trying to get this conversation going now. I'll have my thoughts out there, see if anyone wants to respond. And actually, there is an enormous community of people who aren't academics who go to see Shakespeare in the theatre. Who knew? There is a very vocal, very intelligent, very literate community of people. And one of the things we started finding through blogs like mine and through blogs Jose's talking about is just how rich a conversation is going on. And that's something which informed my ethos of research right away. My PhD with Jonathan, who you met this morning, was a collaborative doctoral award funded by the AHRC in collaboration with the Royal Shakespeare Company to do another set of edition of obscure early modern plays, which we're hoping, one of which will be put on next year in Stratford, and which we're building a set of conferences around. So one of the plays is a play called Thomas Lord Cromwell, and our edition of that will be coinciding happily with the RSC's new productions of Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, the books by Hilary Mantel about Thomas Cromwell, which of course have recently won the Big Book Awards, and which are being put on in Stratford. So my project has always been based around an idea of what is wanted by people who aren't academics, which I often find is still a very foreign idea in academia, the idea that your research interests might in some way be driven by other people, by people who aren't funding bodies or who aren't kind of your faculty. The idea that you might actually be telling the public, addressing something which the public want you to address. There's still a lot of resistance to that idea in the arts, and I think that's where the idea of public engagement and knowledge exchange really comes in. I'm always interested by how much knowledge exchange is a way of us making it sound like knowledge transfer is two-way, when actually it not always is, and how often we actually allow the impetus and the questions to come from what's happening in the wider sphere. And that's where I was going to talk about some of the other kinds of public engagement I do. But what happened when I started listing the kinds of public engagement I do, whether it's talks for theatres, whether it's articles for theatre programmes, whether it's school sessions for people thinking of coming to university, whether it's my blog, in some ways those are all aspects of public engagement where I've not decided what I'm going to do. To give a very blunt example, the Nottingham Shakespeare Society got in touch and said, would you like to come and do a talk for us about your research? And I said, yes, of course, that'd be lovely. And I said, great, you may talk about the Two Gentlemen of Verona or Coriolanus, neither of which are plays I've worked on at all. So I researched Two Gentlemen of Verona, which seemed the more pleasing option at the time, and actually found some wonderful stuff from that, had a very lively conversation with some very experienced theatre goers, and then built that into some work I was doing later on. And in some ways, I don't mind being an academic for hire in that sense. I find it really rewarding, and I find it makes me read things which otherwise I wouldn't necessarily read myself. And so the example I wanted to talk about was the one which Emma and I have written a bit about, which is the Shakespeare authorship conspiracy theories. Because one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is a book called Shakespeare and the Digital World, coming out with the other university press next year. And that's a book about how Shakespeare studies has changed at grassroots level in response to changes in digital technology. And one of the big things is the Shakespeare authorship conspiracy, which has been going on for 120, 130 years or so, people doubting whether or not Shakespeare wrote the plays. And handily, the systems that academia have managed, for the most part, to protect academics from ever having to answer that question. It's been very easily ignored. While communities of doubters form, they've never had a platform. They're barred from peer-reviewed journals because they're not felt to be meeting appropriate academic rigour in their standards. They tend not to get academic positions. They tend not to get a platform. The internet has changed all of that. There are now very, very prominent, very well-funded, very visible Shakespeare authorship sites. And over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years, Emma may disagree, but over the last 10, 15 years, the Shakespeare authorship conspiracy theories have been almost unavoidable because the internet makes it very clear that academia has not been addressing them, and that makes it look like we've got something to hide. And what has actually come out of this is that we've, however we position it, academics have been required to address these questions, if only to stop our own blogs having commenters clutter them up. I mean, there are a system of people who will routinely attack Shakespeare blogs in order to say, well, this is all very well, but he didn't write any of the plays, did he? And you get to a point where at some point you have to start addressing these things, or you have to start deleting comments arbitrarily, which I think opens a whole set of ethical questions, right? These are taxpayers, these are people who are paying for the institutions, and they want the institution to set out its position. And this is something the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust have taken up, and you'll see, I'll pull up Jose's board. The Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, after having resisted this for a very, very long time, how do I make that go back?
If you go up.
Oh, yeah, got it, thank you. There we go. You'll see that Paul Emerton and Stanley Wells combated this first by writing an e-book, which you can download from the website, which they made freely available outside of the normal peer review context as their immediate polemic rebuttal to the question. Then curated an online conference called 60 Minutes with Shakespeare, where 60 academics, practitioners and generally famous people, including the Prince of Wales and Stephen Fry, all contributed 60 seconds on one particular aspect, saying why the conspiracy theories are ridiculous. And then that was followed in turn by the SBT putting out a new edited collection, which came out a couple of months ago. Now, these are all responses, I would argue, to a demand for public engagement which has not previously been met by Shakespeare scholars. I think this is one of the big changing things about the digital world we're living in. The ethos seems to have been, I think, that we don't have to answer this question because it's not methodologically interesting, it's not intellectually stimulating, we think it beneath our notice. The internet and the public engagement agenda have altered that, I think, to a point where I've said we do need to engage with this. It's what we're being asked to address, it's what people would like us to address, and by engaging with this question, hopefully we're also giving back something to people who wouldn't listen to it in other contexts. I think that's been an interesting set of shifts, and I'm interested to think about that, I suppose, as an example of knowledge exchange, where universities are producing something which has actually been very, very useful. A lot of the work that has come out of addressing the Shakespeare authorship conspiracy has actually unveiled some fantastic new information, corrected some long-standing misconceptions within the Shakespeare community, and has done a lot of good things. And I don't think we'd have found those things if we hadn't been required, forced, pressured, whatever, into addressing these questions. And I think that's one of the interesting shifts, this shift to a genuine exchange where the question's being driven by non-academics. That's fair.
That's so interesting. I want to just ask everybody something about... I'll tell you what I was going to talk about quite briefly. I was going to try and talk quite practically about podcasting, my experience podcasting. Partly because I have found this such a sort of transformative aspect of my own professional life over the last couple of years, and partly because it's very, very easy to do. And although it raises lots of questions, some kind of practical, some ideological, about what knowledge exchange might be, what public engagement might be, and that they are important. The other thing to say about it is it's really easy to do, and it's a really easy win. And I mean that it's a win for the profession, it's a win for you personally, it's been a win for me personally. And so in some ways I feel quite zealous about it and think that this is something people ought to try to do. So that's a way of putting out your work, putting out some part of your work through, usually through audio, not through video. I wouldn't bother to do any of it, no disrespect to you, I wouldn't bother to do any of it on video because most lectures are boring. videoed. Really, I mean, the bandwidth that the pictures take up is just not worth. It's not worth the candy, because really you're just talking. So audio podcasting, really easy to record yourself lecturing if you have an iPad or an iPhone or an iPod or something, or other devices are also available, I realise. Just on the lectern. You don't need in my experience, you don't need a microphone. You don't need anything additional to that. You can just record. You can record them while you're doing them. So I'm sorry, this is so sort of hands-on and practical, but this is what I wanted to. I think this is the one thing I wanted to convey to you. So what I have tried to do is to record as many talks that I give in some of the contexts that Peter's talked about. So one thing about serious public engagement is that it's enormously time-consuming. And most of us are not going to become professional public intellectuals. There are some roles for public intellectuals in our society, but actually very few. And most of us maybe don't aspire to that, and also are not going to be it anyway. So public engagement kind of face-to-face it involves quite a lot of investment of time and a sort of a moderate payback. You know, you reach the people who come, the questions of, you know, why people come and how they knew about the event, and whether you talk to a closed society and all those kinds of things. They're all there. But when I do go and give those kinds of talks, or when I go sometimes to schools and talk, and also most importantly when I give my standard undergraduate lectures, I try and record them. And then I put those onto iTunes U. Now the university does that for me. And universities, almost all universities will do that. They have a platform on iTunes U, and they can upload them. But equally, you can put lectures, you can put podcast lectures kind of anywhere on any kind of website. And what's kind of surprising, and in some ways, what Cassie was talking about is really interesting to me about finding your audience. What's very, very odd about the internet is people do find you, and you think, how would they? How would they find you? But somehow they do. And I think making that, in some ways, doubling up work that you're already doing, talks that you're already giving, lectures that you have to give to undergraduates, doubling them up as both a live event to the audience, whatever that is, and as an archived sort of performance that can be downloaded. It's just a really easy thing that has become absolutely second nature to me now. I would almost never not do it. I don't always put them up straight away, and sometimes I think, oh, that's a talk that maybe I'll wait and do something else with it. Or sometimes I think maybe I'll do that talk better and I'll use the recording of that one. So some self-censorship is useful. I think people like to listen to something that they think was really happening. And that will actually, people will put up with not poor quality recording, but recording which has some ambient noise. One of my the first person to listen to them, I think, was probably my mum, and my mum said, "Somebody in your lecture's got a terrible cough," which I hadn't really noticed. And then, really brilliantly, in the next one, I was able to say, "My mum says one of you's got a terrible cough. Here's a glass of water for the person who's got the cough." And so you can make a deal of the fact that you sort of know it's being recorded. I don't think there's any point being kind of shy about that, and I think the people who get in touch with me about listening to the recordings, they actually really like that part. One of my friends told me that the Bishop of Southwark listens to these podcasts, these Shakespeare podcasts that I've done, and I knew that this would come back to me at some completely inopportune point. And about 3 weeks later, when I was lecturing on Midsummer Night's Dream, and the whole burden of my lecture on Midsummer Night's Dream was, this is a really filthy play about sex, and I was trying to adumbrate all these kind of sexual innuendos in it, and I suddenly remembered the Bishop of Southwark. So in fact, I was able to say, somebody told me the Bishop of Southwark listens to these, so just kind of shut your ears. And that has given a sense that there is an audience, that there's an audience beyond the people you're talking to, but that you're also talking to particular people. Other people do podcasts quite differently. They set up much more formally and in some ways much more professionally a kind of a sort of secure and kind of monitored environment or oral environment in which none of that other stuff comes in, and that might be more suitable to you. But I have found it really extraordinary that all kinds of people are prepared to listen to 50-minute lectures. So they don't want them, they don't want little bits. They don't want, in my experience, they don't want 5 minutes, although 5 minutes might be good. They're perfectly able to listen to the kind of talk, the kind of lecture that you would give to an undergraduate, or the kind of talk that you might give, in another, pre-performance or whatever the equivalent might be. And it seems to me that, and I'll just finish with this point, that it's something that you might think of. My experience has been that people listen to these podcasts much more readily than they read things. And I think that may be because people listen to things while they're doing other things which are boring. And so that's quite an important time slot that you have for people. So lots of people say, I listen to these while I'm commuting, or I listen to these, I don't know if I speak very quickly, perhaps I've listened to it on 1.5 speed while I'm running. Or you doing something kind of boring where there's time for your mind to do something rather than reading, which you pretty much have to be doing. You have to put time aside for that. So people will listen to things which they won't read, is my point. And having your material out in an oral form rather than a printed form means that you can release it under certain kinds of, say, a Creative Commons license or something, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about this week or will do. And not stymie yourself, I think, to publish a written form of those, which has the different format that writing has, in a different place. Okay, so I don't think it's an alternative to research publication in the normal way, but I think it's a way into that. Lots of people who get in touch with me about podcasts say, I've bought your book, or is this going to be published in some format? And the bit I wanted to end with was that maybe we could turn this round a bit, that one way to think about communicating research, being in a dialogue about academic research with a broader public, is actually to talk about it rather than to put out more written material. And that, we're in it's funny how the academic world really is interested in the printed word, isn't it? That's mostly where our systems of value are clearest about, how to value that, how to manage that. So the printed word has a really, really high status within the academic community. I'm not sure it does have that status actually outside that. And so although, it's possible to get people to read research or to write for a wider audience, in some ways I think it's better to think about trying to talk to and with a kind of wider audience. Now, clearly, podcasting is a very one-way model. This is kind of transfer rather than exchange, and all the technical language of downloading, which we've sort of imported into negative models of learning, to download, to transfer, cut and paste, those kinds of technical things we've used as derogatory terms in sort of ideas of academic practice. And I can't defend it against being a broadly one-way kind of stream. What I've tried to do, and this is because I suppose this is what my research agenda is really, what I suppose I try to do in that format is to ask a lot of questions, or to point out how questions emerge from material. And even if there isn't a formal way that people can answer those, there isn't a discussion, there isn't the possibility of actual discussion afterwards, I hope that they're reasonably open in a way for people to sort of incorporate and reuse and push against as they would like to. Thank you.